Hey everyone, so my name is Alexandra and I'm going to be teaching you guys about our missionary for today, which is David Livingstone, who is a missionary to Africa. He was born in Scotland in 1813 and he spent his childhood, from the age of 10 he started working in a cotton mill, and he would work long hours during the day and then go home and do school lessons in the evenings and weekends, so he learned how to work hard from a very young age. When he got a little bit older, he started studying Greek theology and medicine at Glasgow with the intent of becoming a medical missionary to China. So that's what he wanted to do, and he ended up becoming a part of the London Missionary Society to train for that. But then, because of the start of the Opium Wars, he wasn't able to go to China. So he thought he knew what God wanted for him, but he ended up having other plans. So he met this guy named Robert Moffat, who convinced him to become a missionary to Africa, which was at this time very unreached by Europeans, and very few people on the continent had heard about Christ. So he set sail, and in 1841, I believe, he ended up in the city of Cape Town at the bottom of the continent. And if you can see all those blue lines, those represent his first few journeys that he took into the heart of the continent. And so for a while he was just, taking trips up, pushing northward into the continent. And in those first few years, he ended up getting married to Robert Moffat's daughter, Mary, and they ended up having a few kids. So in 1852, Mary and their kids moved back to Britain just for security reasons and just for the safety of the family. But that freed up David to do more traveling that he wouldn't have been able to do with the family. So he ended up starting and taking a trip, starting in this place near the middle called Linyanti, and he traveled all the way up to the west coast in the village of Luanda. So he stayed there for a little bit and then moved back and traveled back to Linyanti, and then from there traveled all the way to the east coast in the place called Quelimane. So he ended up crossing the entire continent. So after he had crossed the continent, he went back to England and spent the next about a year and a half speaking and writing. He actually published a book called Missionary Travels and Researches in South Africa that told all about his journeys there and what he had discovered. The one thing about David Livingstone is that he saw firsthand how Africans were treated, and this was back when the slave trade was still going on, and so he ended up being a very firm abolitionist and really standing for the rights of Africans. So that was a lot of what he was talking about when he was back in England, was fighting for the rights of Africans. So after that, he ended up going back to Africa on what was called the Zambezi expedition. So if you look at the map again, there's a river here that kind of goes along a lot of the places that he traveled, called the Zambezi River. And so he took an expedition down there, and this was a government-funded expedition. And they started on the east coast, where he ended his last expedition in Quelimane, and just, tried to push back and do some exploring there. And ended up having a lot of problems, actually. So David Livingstone was really great with working with the natives, but they found out on this expedition that he wasn't that great at working with other Europeans. So there was a lot of problems with the crew and just, arguments. And so after just a lot of obstacles in the expedition, that ended up being recalled by the government. So while it may have seemed like a waste, it actually wasn't, because there was a lot of information that they learned, just geographically, and a lot of valuable exploration was done, even if it ended up seeming like it was a failure. So on this mission, his wife also ended up dying of fever and malaria. So he ended up going back to Britain and stayed there for a couple of years. So when he took this last mission, he ended up taking just a small African and Asian crew, and they set out to find the source of the Nile. So if you look at the map again, you can see the orange line kind of up higher. That's the last mission that he went on. So he went out, and again, there were some problems with the crew, and a lot of them actually ended up deserting. And some of them concocted the story that he had been killed. So for a while, it wasn't sure, like people didn't know if he was dead or alive. But search parties were sent out for him, and eventually this guy named Henry Stanley found him. And at this point, David Livingstone was, in pretty poor health from, all the long years of exploring out in the wilderness. So Stanley was able to bring some medicine and help get him back into good health. So they spent some time together, going out and exploring. But eventually Stanley returned to Britain, but Livingstone decided that he was going to stay and continue his search. So he continued to look, and unfortunately he never ended up finding the source of the Nile, and he actually died in the village of Chitambo. Again, I might be saying that wrong, so I'm sorry. And his body was brought back to Britain to be buried there. But so it may seem like, I started this off telling you that he was a missionary, and it may seem like, he was just like an explorer. Like, it doesn't really seem like a lot of what we think about when we talk about like missions. But he was really able to reach a lot of people, and he had a really big impact on European attitude towards slavery. And so he really had a huge impact on that. And he was able to reach a lot of people for Christ, even though, what he was doing doesn't necessarily look like what we consider to be like evangelism always. So that just kind of shows you that like whatever you're doing, it can really be, you can be a missionary. Like the song that you've probably heard us singing a lot is "Be a Missionary Every Day." And that can look different for different people. Like you're not always going to be going door to door. Like for some of you, this is going to be like if you're playing sports or if you're in band or something like that. That can be your mission field, and you can do all the things that you do for the glory of God. So thank you guys for watching. I hope that you guys will look up more about David Livingstone, because he really was a really cool person. So we'd love to see what you guys think about it, so comment down below and let us know what you think. Bye!